faith. So being, if God brought us into Israel and didn't build the Beit HaMikdash, Dayenu. But it seems like we're missing something very, very important. And how can we say Dayenu? Well, we live that line today very strenuously. God gave Eretz Israel back to us in 1948. The old city, the place of the Beit HaMikdash in 1967, and I haven't heard anybody cry over the fact that we don't have a Beit HaMikdash. Rav Soloveitchik to say the only time he ever saw anybody cry in the show was Ne'ilah and Tisha. I can understand Tisha, but I'm telling you, I don't see anybody crying over the fact that none of us are going to bring a carbon up next Wednesday. No one's crying. The one that I find truly problematic, you don't care abundantly, they are seen on. I don't know about you guys, but if you're going to schlep me out to the Sinai, in the middle of the Sinai, and go from the mountain and not get the Torah for the because it better be good refreshment. That's all I have to do. Because I don't understand that, but it's not my question only. Other rabbis have written about it years before. I'm going to mention one from Pam, the late Rosh Hashiva of Torah, and he said that when the Jews got to Mount Sinai, they were transformed to become spiritually soulful. They were as pure as Adam and Chava prior to the city. I don't know where he gets it, but that's his conjecture. And that would basically answer the question, what benefit is it to stand there at Mount Sinai? But I want to share with you one personal vignette for me. I had the opportunity on a sabbatical from here to learn by Rabbi Bushman. Mr. Diamond knows him very well. He was a big gadol, very big gadol. He joined Dayan in Vilna at a very young age and came to America, eventually made it back to Eretz Yisrael. And he had a yeshiva, Netzach Israel, Bogan in Israel. And I was fortunate to spend 6 months learning. And you should know this Rav, he gave one shir a week. As at 12 o'clock on Thursday, with the center clock, he's standing there giving a shir, and he ends exactly at 2 hours. The Mara Makomo, the material that is going to cover the sugya is posted on the 12th support of the Beit Midrash on Sunday evening. And you have a whole week to prepare. This is not a yeshiva for youngsters, not a yeshiva for teenagers. Everybody there is in their 30s, 40s, or 50s or something. And at the base Midrash, they get fit and packed, maybe 60 people. Thursday afternoon, 12 o'clock, there are at least 250 men squished into that big Midrash. Years go by, every time I'm in Yerushalayim, I would run over there and be part of it. His wife died, got older, began to decline physically, mentally. I came, I attended the shiur. He gave the questions orally, 12 o'clock. He was finished at 5 after 1. Questions unanswered. The whole thing was, I want to be kind to the Rebbe, but you couldn't get the picture. The executive director comes to me after the shiur and says, David, told him, I now have the answer. The question that bothered me for decades. You care abundantly, they have Sinai, I came thousands of miles to you. left the Torah group, came over here to the yeshiva, and I didn't get the Torah that we normally got. And yet, I feel inspired. I feel spiritually uplifted, even though I didn't get the Torah. So now I have an answer to an age-old question in Dayanim. I want to wish everybody Freilich. We usually say Freilich before and it's afraid it's a kosher for you. Freilich.
Exhausting.
How are you? Just kind of talking about Davis, I heard a beautiful answer to that question in your head. Do answer that. The Kiddush aspect of our Sinai, the fact that Kal Yisrael, right, by Yicham Sham Yisrael Leged Haaretz, language of the singular, Yefidus, one person, because everyone was connected, everyone was together, and that alone was worthwhile to be born from our Sinai just for the fact that Kal Yisrael was Kiddush Echad, they're all together by Yicham, singular, not Yachanu. Why? It's Kiddush Echad. It's a lesson, you know, unfortunately, I wasn't going to say this, but unfortunately, it takes everyone going against us for some reason for us to always bind together and come together. When there's nothing going on, we're at each other's throats. And it's, you know, it's that has to change at some point, you know, this constant merry-go-round of bickering, war, we join together, war ends, bickering. And you know, that's the one lesson that you can jump strong. The Dayanim is that nothing's better to a parent than when his children get along. The children get along, can really live with anything. Because the children are getting along. At least they're getting along. Hey, not the best, not this, not that, they're not doing everything. Makes no difference if they're getting along. To me, that means the world, says Hashem. I wanted to say a little bit something about Karatato, Karasato. I think who's Satchel? You know who Satchel was? Louis Armstrong, right? So everyone knows Louis Armstrong was one of the greatest, if not the greatest, trumpeter. The trumpet, you had a trumpet, right? So what a lot of people don't realize, and don't know, that in fifth grade, he was forced to leave school because there was no money, he had to go to work. He met the Karnofsky family, the Lithuanian Shem Karnofsky, right? Who took him in, and not only took him in, they gave him work with them, selling coal. And the Karnofsky parents, the mother, as it would come evening, she would say to Louis, your mother's probably, she knew there was no food in the house. Your mother probably is, she's very busy, don't, come, you'll live with us. And day after day, week after week. And they, in fact, bought him his first trumpet. And they started playing it. And it became Louis Armstrong, right? What a wonderful world. What a beautiful song. For his whole life, post that, when he could afford it, it's one of the first purchases he made. You know what one of the first purchases he made was? A mugging dubbin that he wore around his neck for the rest of his life. When he was a young man, being successful, for the rest of his life, he wore it, whether he was wearing his bow tie, you couldn't see it, or in the studio when he was just wearing a t-shirt, and he was wearing that mugging dubbin. If you look throughout Shmos, Eira, Bo, Shalach, the storyline of Yetzias Mitzrayim, Makos, is loaded with different inyonei hakarat, different ideas of parasite. Moshe Rabbeinu is not allowed to perform Makasam. He gives his staff to stick to our why? Because the seed is buried. And he was saved. Again, The next, right, Makaskita, you can't do either. You have to stick to Aaron. Why? There's the sand, safe and gliding. Now, as we all know, the next day, Paro found out. So clearly the body wasn't hidden from him. Yet, he still showed Hakadah Torah. Now, let me ask you something. Does the sea feel your Hakadah Torah? Does the sand feel your Hakadah Torah? No, it doesn't. Hakadah Torah is not about the receiver. It's about you. It makes no difference whether or not the receiver feels better. It has nothing to do with it. It's a sensitizer for us. The concept of giving Odah. Why can't Ammon and Moab, the two nations of Ammon and Moab, cannot join Palestine? Like at least the men cannot. Why not? Because they did not bring out Mayan Muslims. They didn't bring them when we need them. So they didn't bring out for us water, pretty much coffee and Danishes. They didn't give you coffee and Danishes, so they can't join Jewish people. How does that make sense? Because what are we called? Yehudim. Our whole mitzvah, our whole being is Hudah. If you don't have even the slightest bit of that, you can't be a Jew. It doesn't work. It's not a punishment. It just won't work. We're all about Hakaras Torah. But we're going into the Seder, we're going in. You can have your children with you, you can have our families with us. Hakaras Torah is one of the most essential ideas that has to be given over. Hakarat Tov to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hakarat Tov to whoever's preparing the Seder. I'll end with this, this concept of keeping everything, framing everything the way it's supposed to be. There was once a Holocaust survivor who was very much off, but he agreed to go to the Nesivas Shalom for a Seder. And beautiful set Seder in Israel, there's white tablecloth, gorgeous, everything was beautiful. One of the young children, right at the onset of the Seder, spilled the wine, the grape juice all over the white table. For the rest of that Seder, the Nesivas Shalom was so dearing to that child and so building him up and making him feel so good that this survivor became one of his biggest Hasidim and biggest vows and came back. Somebody could show me that a little child's innards is worth more than any big, white, beautiful tablecloth. That's the people I want to be part of. Hakarat Torah, keeping everything in perspective, understanding what the Seder is about. No screaming, no yelling, you have to hear this, please. And again, above all, Hakarat Torah to the Ribbon Shalom, for where we are. Ilu kirvenu v'nei harsina, g'rol masalan v'as-Torah dayinu, ish echad v'lei b'chad, and be'ez Hashem, I'm going to be holding our Rabbi Davis in one thing. I want a carbon case up this year. And there's no reason why we can't have it. No reason. Like a blink of an eye. That's all it takes. You're head of Friday. So why not? Why not? Thank you.
Great guy in Mount. He said to me, I'm going to go with you into the grave of Louis Armstrong. That was on his mind.
That's hilarious.
Because he knew the story.
Oh, really? It's amazing.
Good evening, everyone. I want to talk a little bit about what's on the menu at the Seder. Specifically, the main course. Everybody has their favorite recipes. Everyone has their favorite foods. Everyone has their traditional go-to for Pesach. Is there any halachic framework or guidance as it relates to the main course at the Seder? We know at the Seder with the proper Pesach, Pesach was dessert. The meal itself was the shlamim, the other korbanos, the giga, the other korbanos that could have been offered as part of the pilgrimage experience. What about today? Any direction, any inklings? So the Yerushalmi, the Talmud Yerushalmi says that Bekulin, outside Yerushalayim, or more specifically after the construction of the temple, our main course should comprise Shnei Tavshilin, two cooked items, one Zeichel Pesach and one Zeichel Chagim, each of them corresponding to one of the korbanos, a commemoration of these two korbanos that were the fixture of the menu, main course, and the dessert at the times of the Beis Hamikdash. So why two? Why not one? So two is because a regular meal consists of one tafshil. The Yontif meal has to be nicer, has to be more elaborate. So there's two tafshilim. The Talmud Bavli goes to suggest various possibilities of what constitutes halachically shnei tafshilin. So it could be as simple as meat and its broth, or meat and its sauce. Mar also says that it can be served as one dish with two components, like fish and egg dish that's together. It's not two different dishes, but it's two different main ingredients, two different proteins. It could be two types of meat. And one possibility that the Gemara raises on knowledge, even though I'm not Ashkenazi, is rice and beets, which constitute two different, or quinoa beets, which constitute two different tafshilim for the purposes of this Yerushalmi. So we see that the idea of a main course being specifically two tafshilim, two dishes corresponding to the two karbanos is very early. Rosh Hashanah says not two, but possibly three. First points out that there's an additional, not just the two dishes are not just corresponding to the two karbanos of Hagadah and Pesach. He suggests the tradition that the two dishes we serve as the main course at the Seder correspond to the two great leaders of Moshe and Aaron. He goes on to suggest that some had the custom of having a third dish, main dish. And that would correspond to Miriam. Introducing Miriam to the Seder is not a feminist idea only. It's a Geonic idea. That all three of the siblings were part of the Gevula process. Shuragon suggests that those three main courses suggested that traditionally were comprised of fish, meat, and eggs. And this idea of the egg finds more expression when we shift a few centuries out of Babel and Leonin to France in the 14th century, when the Orphosyrian suggested that, riffing on the riff says that there should be two main courses at the Seder, one of them boiled, one of them broiled, one of them visceral, one of them sleeved, and the Orphosyrian suggests that the main dish that's made out of visceral, that's boiled, that's not as exposed to liquid cooking, should be an egg. That should be the main course that we eat at the Seder. Why? So the Orphosyrian suggests it's related to Avelos. You know that when a person is sitting Shiva in the morning, the first meal that they're offered is the Suda Sabra, the Suda of Tanchumen, consolation, and you offer the mourner an egg as part of that meal. The Orphosyrian says that we're sitting here to Seder last year, there's no Korban Pesach. We're sitting there, there's no Korban Pesach. It's a reminder of the challenges that we have, the destruction of the temple, all of the sadness that surrounds that. Therefore, eating an egg as a main dish is appropriate. The Orphosyrian also says the circle egg is symbolizing the Galgalah Chayim, cycle of life. Is also appropriate, not just in general, when we're talking about mourning, but also the Seder experience. The Shivu Legula, from bondage to redemption, the Evel Yom Tov, from mourning to celebration. This circle is encapsulated in our lives, and it is encapsulated in the story that we tell on Pesach. It's interesting that at this point in time, what we're talking about are what are we eating at the Seder. These were items, whether it was the meat or the egg, that you eat as part of the meal for these symbolic reasons. That took a hit. The idea of eating the egg as part of the meal instead of just having it symbolically on the Seder plate, which is kind of a little bit anachronistic, because a Seder plate, a plate means it's something you eat off of. Everything else on the Seder plate, we eat, right? We eat karoses, we eat karpas, we eat maror. Then you have this zroa and the beta. All of a sudden, there's a question as to whether you're going to eat it. Why? Why wouldn't you just assume that that corresponds to the shtei tashil and the two main courses? Well, because of two reasons. Number one, Tosfos suggests, or as the Rif said, one should be cooked, one should be broiled. Two, tafshilin should both be broiled, should be roasted. Then we have the Mishnah Safin. The Mishnah Safin says, Makom Shinagu. That there are different customs related to many aspects of Erev Pesach and Pesach. One of the aspects, one of the practices that was dependent on local custom was whether, in the absence of the Karban Pesach, it was appropriate or permitted to eat sleep. You're allowed to eat roasted meat or roasted proteins at the Seder. It seems to be that over time the consensus practice across the Jewish world was to be stringent on this matter and not to eat those roasted meats, things that are cooked without any liquid. So if Tosfos said that the shtei tashilin on the Seder plate are meant to be roasted, and we say that nowadays we don't eat things that are roasted, we end up with two objects on your Seder plate that are purely commemorative, purely symbolic, no longer are on the menu to be eaten. In fact, there's an idea that's suggested that what are the two symbolic items on the Seder plate? The pizza and the zroa. That symbolizes, corresponds to the fact that Hashem wanted to take us out of Egypt with an outstretched arm. The word desire in Aramaic is be'ah, similar to the word for egg. An outstretched arm, of course, is zroa. Be'ah and the zroa, the egg and the shake bone, no longer on the menu, now on the Seder plate, not eating, but just reminded of these lessons that are so important and appropriate for Pesach. So comes along the Ramah, Moshe Isserles, in his comments on the Shulchan Aruch, and he brings back the egg, bringing it back to the menu. He says that Noah gave the mix-up the komo, lachol, the suda, beats him. Right, that it's a custom in some communities, in some locations, to eat at the Suda of the Seder, at the Shulchan Aruch of the Seder, eggs. Famously, the first night of Pesach corresponds on the day of the week as the same day as Tisha B'Av, and the idea of eggs being a morning item of food. All of these are reasons to eat the egg. How is the egg prepared that we're going to eat? So we get a hint from the Ramah, because the Ramah, in his note that there are people who eat an egg, not just have it on the Seder plate, quotes the Maharil. Maharil says that there's a concern when it comes to eating the egg at the Seder, not because you're always supposed to dip twice at the Seder, and it's sort of like ellipsis. What does that have to do with eating an egg? It seems to be that the custom was to eat an egg dipped in salt water. That's not, originally he just quotes an idea of eating the egg. If it goes back to eating the two tafshilin, the two main courses, why do you have to dip it in salt water? Seems to be a connection to the halachos of Tisha B'Av. You're supposed to dip your bread in salt, and you read, right? Dip your bread in salt and your egg in ashes. Somehow it got transported into dipping the egg at the Seder into the salt water. So how do you answer the Maharil? So the poskim, the more contemporary poskim, give a couple of suggestions as to how you can accomplish this minhag that many of us are familiar with, without violating the idea in the Mamish Tana of only two dippings at the Seder. First off, one could suggest that it's salt water. You already use salt water. It's the same salt water. Others suggest that you don't use your hand, you use a fork. Lastly, some suggest that you don't dip the egg in salt, you pour salt water over the egg, which is the origins, which is the genesis of a tradition that some people have, myself included. And not only do you have egg dipped in salt, but you create a egg salt soup type of concoction. Right? Some people may have that. Don't be embarrassed. Right? And people have this custom of having mash the egg into the before Pesach, before Yantav, and mash it, and maybe at the right time. And it's a combination of water, salt, and egg yolks. So maybe you cut up the egg whites, however your recipe is. That may be based on this idea that you don't want to dip the egg in salt water because you're only supposed to dip the karpas. You're only supposed to dip the karpas in salt water. But this idea of the egg is back on the menu, not just on the Seder plate, but on the menu itself, not just a symbolic item that we talk about, but something that many of us have the custom of eating at the very beginning of Shulchan Aruch. Why would that be the appropriate time? So, right before Shulchan Aruch is Korech. We make a big deal that Korech is the sandwich Zeichel Mikdash. How appropriate it is to go from the Zeichel Mikdash of the Korech right into an egg, which is either Zeichel or Korban, corresponding to the mourning we had over the destruction of the temple, or Zeichel Mikdash, Zeichel Korban Chagiga, as the Vilna Gaon suggests, it corresponds to the Chagiga offering. Just to conclude, so not only is the egg a symbolic of circle of life, mourning, but the Pri Megadim, a couple of other very briefly ideas surrounding the egg. The Pri Megadim says that the egg corresponds to the meal that Yaakov Avinu prepared for his father when his grandfather Avraham died. Tradition has it that Avraham died on Erev Pesach, and Yaakov prepared a meal of round items, of lentils, that were offered as that meal of consolation, and of course, which was offered on Pesach time. Corresponding to that moment, we have a tradition, which was the moment in time when Esau sold his birthright to Yaakov for the bowl of round lentils. It's the moment in time when Yaakov was elevated into legitimately the heir to the tradition, to the bracha, to the blessing of Abraham and Yitzchak. Others suggest that, like the Chassam Sofer says, that an egg is one of those objects, one of those foods, that the more it is exposed to heat, the harder it gets. Right? That's a soft-boiled egg, a hard-boiled egg, and that's like a Jewish meatball. When the going gets tough, when we're exposed to heat, when we're exposed to difficulties, it strengthens us. It's a lesson in Jewish resilience. And lastly, the Leibla Eger, Hasidic son of Rabbi Akiva, points out that the egg is unique among all foods, among all proteins, among all creations, because all other creatures are born complete. When an egg comes out, the chick inside needs time. It needs time to incubate in the egg before it's ready to hatch. Right? It speaks of an incomplete birthing process. And Leibel Eger said that's an element of our experience at the Seder. We celebrate Yetziat Mitzrayim. The Exodus from Egypt, as amazing as it was incomplete. Very micro level, the purpose of leaving Egypt wasn't just to leave Egypt, but was to receive the Torah 7 weeks later. Right? Leave Egypt to serve Hashem on the mountain. And in the bigger picture, we know that because of the haste, the chipazon, which is the topic of my afternoon shir on Shabbos Hagadah, it's coming Shabbos, we left Egypt a little early. We didn't wait the 400 years that were promised by Hashem to Avraham Avinu, the Greek Beit HaTorah, and we left after 210 years. And as a result, the Geula from Mitzrayim was not shlema, it wasn't complete. Where there have been exiles and returns and exiles since then. We remind ourselves that the process of redemption is not a all or nothing. It can take time. It can be a process, just like it was in the times of Egypt. And we don't give up hope. That process ultimately reaching its conclusion. And so, those of us who have redeemed the egg from the symbolic Seder plate to part of our Shulchan Aruch, and even if you didn't, just looking at the egg on the Seder plate, it's a reminder of our unique identity as the heirs of the birthright. It's a reminder of Jewish resilience, and it's a reminder that a process of redemption can take time. It has steps forward and steps back. Lastly, there's a Hagadah that quoted this idea, I forget whose name, that not only is the egg a sign of mourning, but it's from the perspective of the mourner, but from the perspective of the comforter, it's the first expression of consolation. And so the idea being is that we look for resilience, but we also recognize that Hashem, as it were, symbolically giving us the egg. Hashem is ultimately the source of great comfort to us. And if we keep this in mind, the power of resilience, the power of the Jewish people, the power of redemption being a process, the fact that Hashem is always there to comfort us, then whatever comes our way, whether it's salty eggs or not, we always can look forward to brighter days ahead. Thank you very much.
I have.
Mr. Rabbanan, this morning, a really interesting thing happened. Sitting in a classroom, and one of the students turns to us, and we're talking about Pesach, and what are they excited about? Are they excited about, the Afikomen and searching for it? And one of those kids just goes, "Oh, I know what my dad's going to say." I'm like, "What is your dad going to say?" And you guys can already say it. Why do I pay for Jewish day school when you can only, right? Like, you have to read the Mamish Tana. He's not going to know the word. He's going to fumble on the word. He's curious of that voice already. Right? I paid for Jewish day school. I paid for Jewish day school. Maybe you should go to public school call for it. And everyone here, unfortunately, has heard probably something similar to Seder once or twice. And it got me thinking about how sad that is, because the whole entire Seder itself is formed as a teaching mechanism. And I was sitting there going, is it really, we say that the whole idea is about, teaching the children, and so the children should ask, and, we got the Manish Tana, and that's like a highlight for them, but then what's going on in the middle? And I started to think about what higher education says, in terms of secular education. If anybody here has ever heard of Bloom's taxonomy, it's usually the first thing to go to is Bloom's taxonomy. And basically what it does is it gives you stages of knowledge and how that sort of works. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I think there's any correlation between Bloom's taxonomy and the Hagadah itself and the way that it's written. Because I started to realize that there's a lot of things that take place, right? So there's auditory learners, and they're going to get to hear the songs, the stories that we're telling over. There are people who need to be sensory involved. You get to touch things at the Seder, right? There are people who are visual learners. We're going to say matzah, dusha, and ochlem. Right? We're going to start pointing to different things at the Seder. And I'm sitting there really starting to get a little chills, like there's genius going on here in a certain sense, way before we had this idea. And then they have the Rabbanan, obviously, the four sons, right? And YIH Rabbis actually says that the fifth son that they don't talk about because he's not at the Seder. And the statements that I heard from that student is to me, how that happens, right? Instead of somebody focusing on the many ways, the myriads of ways that it actually is an education tool and what the tool is telling us, we skip over that whole point and we look at it to be a performance, right? Where is my kids' Devar Torah? Where is my, tuition dollars at work? Let me see how you show off to it. But what's interesting is it's really for us to teach the children. So now you might ask yourself the question, what business do I have teaching children about anything, right? I don't know all this stuff, I don't know what's going on. So it's very interesting because the Haggadah, in one way, yes, it's telling over the story of Jews leaving Egypt. But just as much, it's talking about our own stories. So let's just start in the beginning with Bloom's, and I'll explain. The first step in Bloom's taxonomy. Could you use some mic? Sorry. The first step in Bloom's taxonomy is remembering, right? So you actually draw from memories and see what you can actually remember as facts. So in the beginning, we have Manish Tana. I said we jog everyone's memory. We say right after that, to understand what's going on, you're just slaves. It's the second level, understanding. Then we have the third, which is to apply, right? And how we apply it is to say, tie the whole door by door, every single generation, a person has to view himself like he led Egypt. So now I understand what it means to be a slave. Now I have to apply this logic, right, and emote with the characters in a certain sense. And very interesting, the word Mitzrayim is a compound word. Mitzar, which means straits, and Yam, which means of the ocean. So the Jews were pushed up right against the ocean, and they had nowhere to go. So Kadosh Baruch Hu takes them out of Mitzrayim and brings them, right, to a place of the desert, an open space, if you will. So we see in the Haggadah, over and over again, it says that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. He took us, you could have just said it took us out of there 90% of the time, and we know what we're talking about already. So why does it specifically say Mitzrayim? Because we're pointing to this metaphysical idea of our own eternal fights that we have to go through as Jewish people, as our families, as whatever struggles you've had in life. And when you show your children that we've persevered over those internal struggles also, that's what we're giving over. And nobody can give it over like you. Because the parents have the relationship with their kids to see, I can do this. I'm part of this family. I'm part of this people. And therefore, I have the ability to go. See, my ancestors have been doing it for years. But they were also doing this on a spiritual sense, saying that we're not going to give into culture. So while we're applying, we start to think about all these things. Then we have to analyze. How do we get this over to students in general, right? If it's not working a little bit, let's analyze the situation. So, and also where we see these ideas that are actually what we should be teaching over. So we start to analyze texts, the psukim themselves, and we have the 4 sons, right? Different ways and models of teaching. Then we have to evaluate. So we start to figure out how do we fulfill this mitzvah, right? So we have ideas of maybe by Rosh Chodesh, you should start doing this, right? If you didn't say these 3 things, you weren't good to the mitzvah, right? And we start to evaluate what it is that this mitzvah is. And the last step is to create. And what we see at the end of the Haggadah is songs people have created. We see people creating fruits, right? They start to encourage other things like that to remember what went on, right? This is the pneumatic, way someone used to say something. And we see how people were able to tell over the story that we see at this round. The process of just telling over your story in relationship to the story that we have here is enough. And every single person has that story for them, of their family, of their journey. And when we invite people into that story, there's no way anyone can feel left out. Because everyone has their own personal struggles that they've done. And then at a certain point, Kadosh Baruch Hu answers them. And we say in Hallel, Min ha-meitzar karati, called God from the straits. Hanani, the answer came, Bamercha, from the width. Second, we think we're stuck. There's no way out. I don't have this, I don't have that. Keep somebody sick. And all of a sudden, like you said, it's actually terrifying, right? At the blink of an eye, it's all worked out. Hashem had a plan for us. So we teach our children over is the Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim, which is more of that than that. It's a style of learning that we use as Jewish people, our heritage. And I'm wishing everyone an amazing Seder. May we celebrate next year with the Carbon Pesach. I'm going to do my best to cry about it, though. Right.
Sure.
We don't know if you're cautious. False questions. We've heard them in multiple languages. One year, said it in Korean. Very entertaining. Always a lot of fun. Tonight, questions. Being able to ask questions definitely expression of freedom. And the theme of the holidays definitely, as we say, feel free, to feel open, to feel relaxed, intellectually expressive. Think beyond that slave mentality. What are the answers to all of the questions? So let's go through them one by one. One of the questions we asked was, Shebachol Halelos, on every other night of the year, you can eat chametz, you can have matzah, halal azeh, full matzah. It's exclusively matzah from the same night. So what's the answer to that? So we eventually get to answering the question later in the Seder. We say matzah, the reason we have matzah is because like I once said, it's going to talk about on Shabbat afternoon. keep your feet plus on. We were rushed out. It was just simply no time. So that's how we have nuts. Okay, next question. Shebachol halelos, we eat whatever vegetables we want. Any types of yarkos. Halal is that maror. We have maror. So what's the answer to that question? It also appears later in the Hagadah. Maror zu shemochlin because I am maroru eskayem. Our lives were bitter in Egypt. So we are reliving this experience by having maror at the Seder. Another question that we ask. Shebachol halelos, we could eat bein yoshin, or bein yosubin, we could be sitting, or we could be leaning. Halal is that? We all lean. Why is that? So we may not be able to point to an explicit answer to this question, but certainly there's an implicit answer to that question. And that's maybe the theme of the Hagadah. Chol dor v'dor. Chayav adam. Adam has the verbiage of lahar osasatsa. It's not enough just to see oneself, but to demonstrate, to act it out. A lot of drama. Speaking to this point, it's a very educational moment, an important tool to be dramatic, to build the excitement for the young, impressionable minds. Bring out all sorts of props at our Seder. We do all sorts of silly, funny dances at our Seder to keep it exciting, to keep it engaging. So that's exactly it. You're going to lead. You're going to do a physical demonstration of freedom. But I really want to focus, just a couple of minutes, is the last question that I have yet to answer. Shebachol halelos ein anu matiyun mechilu pam achas. We don't get it once. Halayla hazeh, tonight at the Seder night, we do what in my household is never accepted. Double dip. A double dip? Halayla hazeh shit. I mean, you're not allowed to double dip. What's going on? What's the deal? What's the answer to this question? So you could say, there's a value in asking questions, even if you don't have answers. It's an expression they say in yeshiva. I don't understand the question. Don't die from my question. You can move on. Be perplexed by a quagmire and sugya. You turn the page, you move on, you go. Part of Jewish living. Take who? Let it stand. Eliyahu will work it out for us eventually. But we keep on plowing ahead. So maybe there's an educational value in that. Not really necessarily such a great answer to why we double dip on the Seder night. But I'd like to analyze something that we say in the Hagadah. We talk about a lot of Jewish history in the Hagadah. And what we say, we actually quote something from Sifri Yehoshua. We say that Yehoshua said, Jewish people, we talk about the history, Terah, Avi Avram, Avi Nahor, they served foreign gods. And Hashem is speaking, he's saying, I took your father Avram from Abraham, from the other side of the river, and I led him through Eretz Canaan. And I multiplied his children. And I, says Hashem, gave him his son, Yitzchak. And I gave Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Esau. And I gave Esau, Har Seir. Hashem is in charge. Hashem is driving all of this period of Jewish history. But then, paragraph concludes and says, the Yaakov Uvanav Yardu Mitzrayim. Not that I took Jacob and his children to Egypt. Yaakov and his children went down to Egypt. What happened? I thought Hashem was the protagonist and the one who is, orchestrating all of everyone else's movements. Why at the very end, we talk about, when you read that to the term, how we got to the term in the first place, is it described as Yaakov himself and his children doing it. So that really forces us to think more carefully about that initial story. The initial story of how the Jewish people got down to Mitzrayim in the first place. And herein lies the first of the two divisions. You know the story. We know the story where there was unfortunate infighting. The brothers couldn't get along. And they had a plan. The plan went a little bit maybe worse than planned, according to some, better than planned according to others, between the brothers. But what ended up happening? How did they go to Yaakov to convince him what happened and said, he was devoured by a wild animal. He took his coat, technicolor coat, belonging to Joseph. They dipped it in goat's blood. And he showed it to Yaakov Avinu. And Yaakov says, yes, this must be the blood of my son, Chayav. And he couldn't be consoled, as is relayed in the story in the Chumash and Parshas YIH. That's the beginning of the Jewish people. Yosef entered obviously in Mitzrayim, and Hashem orchestrated that they should be there and be really the beginning of the salvation for the Jewish people when they came those years later during the famine. So that's the first of the two dippings. And then we have yet another dipping at the end of the Yetzias Mitzrayim, coming out of Egypt, where we're talking about the ritual of the Karban Pesach. Ulakaften should take. What does it say? Agundas action of hyssop branches. You should dip it in blood, goat's blood, place it on your doorposts. But the evocative word in the instructions, it's time to gather together. It's time to rectify what happened all those years ago at the time of the first dipping. That was a dipping of division, of infighting, of fractured relationships. Let's bring it all together. If you want to get out of Mitzrayim, this is the ritual. It's one of Hagadah. You have to gather together and dip it. That's the way to get out. So if we understand it as such, it seems that that's the answer to the question, perhaps. The answer to the question of why you get twice, that you have to go along with the journey through Jewish history. I have a system, we have a tool of Masma Bekinos, Messiah Shabbat. We talk about our lowly, degrading beginnings and how we got there in the first place. And then we talk about eventually how we got out. But that's alluded to two dippings. We double dip Seder night. I think I once read from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, if that's his memory, he described it very beautifully. And that's based upon the thoughts of Rabbi Shai, that the idea is at the beginning of the Seder, you take something that's otherwise sweet, you take the karpas, tastes good, we're all, with a healthy, hearty appetite for potato, celery, after fasting for the past what feels like 24 hours. You're hungry. You take something delicious, but what do? You dip it into salt water. Out. Something bitter, something terrible. But the idea is that that's the first of the dippings. That's the story. There's a beautiful family. It's something so sweet, everything going for them. And they ruined it. You took something sweet and you ruined it. Ruined the relationship. End of the Seder, what do we do? And then we take tomorrow, we take something bitter, and we dip it into the charosas. We went through a very bitter time. But with the right perspective, with the sense of community, with the sense of solidarity, with the sense of aguda, with the sense of aftos, you can actually sweeten that experience. You take something bitter, you take the murder, and put it into something sweet. So that's perhaps by way of innuendo a little bit. We're actually answering that question as well. Lila said, yes, this night, when we're going through the sweeping story of Jewish history of the Gnus and the Shabbat, those two dipping, the dipping of Yosef's coat in goat's blood, and the counteracting dipping of the Hagadah Night in the blood at the time of the Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's what's going on. I'll just conclude with a jarring comment. Why is partially jarring simply at this time? And I have it here in his sefer. This is a sefer called Kovetz Ha'aros, authored by Rav Yochanan Wasserman. Hashem Yikom Damo. Yochanan Wasserman was the great student of the Chofetz Chaim and Chaim Soloveitchik. He ran yeshiva in Baranovich. The last known photograph of Rav Yochanan Wasserman is he's on a boat, he's on a ship. He was in America, he was fundraising people. He spent some time definitely in New York, and he made it out to the Midwest. They had this travel lot, both were raising money for his yeshiva, and the fires were raging in Europe. He said the famous line, and everyone said, stay here, why are you going back to Europe? He said, no, the captain doesn't leave. The captain can't leave his ship. He's literally on the ship on the way back to the inferno of Europe. And we know that Yochanan actually, if you look at another one of his stories, recorded when he instructed his Talmidim, really powerful, very powerful. He said we're going to be going out, we're taking out to the seventh fort just outside of the city of Kovna, where he and many of his students were murdered. And he was instructing them about we have the opportunity to be a part of Hashem, and we should purify our thinking, that we should have be an apostle carbon with people, really extremely high stuff, very, very powerful, incredible person. So in this sefer, in the back, he has some comments on Haggadah portions. And he talks about why there is this obsession throughout Jewish history, definitely European history, of blood libels. If you think about it, it's absolutely ludicrous that we, the Jewish people, should be accused of eating blood, first of all. Eating blood, if anyone who's a basic student of the Bible knows, you get kares. It's the worst of the worst. To accuse the Jewish people of eating blood, and you know, well, it's ludicrous. It's insane. And you know, you can read online that it's actually part of modern day anti-Semitic rhetoric that people will believe it. It's absolutely ridiculous. Much like a lot of the other things about us holy people. And the question becomes, the Yochanan wants to know why. What's this about? Just read you his words. It's so ludicrous that it causes you to wonder. Isn't the kernel of truth in any lie? Quotes from his mind so dumb that for it to be able to perpetuate this lie for all these centuries, it must be a kernel of truth. So what's the kernel of truth embedded in these ridiculous claims that the Jewish people, amongst, you know, first of all, they never claimed that we need blood for the lulav, or that the shofar needs an inner coating of Christian blood. Like, what's the claim specifically when it comes to matzah? So he doesn't exactly address that. I think he does by way of an answer. And he says, I'll just quote you the words. I would never say this. It's quote, V'lulei she'eneni kedai. If it wasn't, you know, maybe it's not appropriate for me to suggest this. Omer, maybe it corresponds to the sin of, he quotes the pasuk, Adam. The brothers took Joseph's coat and they dipped it in blood. The Ibn Shahisi, the Yochanan says, if I made a mistake, Hashem prepared God should atone for my sin. It's daring. It's a daring claim. But he says that there has to be maybe some kernel of truth. Maybe there's something going on over here. So, and that's a powerful idea. That makes it more relevant to Pesach Vadot. Some historians maintain the reason why there's this claim specifically surrounding matzah has to do with the seasons. Frozen tundra of Eastern Europe, it's at this time of year, or Canada, as I know, it's at this time of year, the snow and the ice begins to melt. And sadly, it would uncover a lot of lifeless bodies that were discovered. Lakes, rivers died in the cold winter, so they got to figure out how did this all happen. So, just the way it worked out, they had to find the Jew to blame it on. What's the upcoming holiday? Passover, perfect, Nazis, the end of the story, that's it. But perhaps on a spiritual, subconscious level, there could be something deeper. But again, if you have to understand, two dipping, the answer to that question, why we did it twice, that it's about the genesis of our identity of becoming a unified nation. And we went into Mitzrayim because of the toxicity of this fragmentation of the family of the Jewish people. And Pesach is that hard work that's required to rid ourselves from that, to extricate ourselves from that, to join together, even in our bitter existence, take our bitter to something sweet, come together. So it's during this time of Pesach specifically that this deep wound resurfaces on some sort of metaphysical level. It could be there's a connection between this terrible libel against the Jewish people that is absolutely unfounded in according to their evidence, the Yochanan wants to maybe on some sort of metaphysical level, it's not completely unfounded. And we're here because there's still more work to be done. So as we gather together with our families, it's a challenging time. And we may be a little bit sleep deprived, we may be a little bit on edge. There's a lot that went into Pesach. I'm sitting with family members that, of course, we love, but we don't necessarily always get along with. So work extra hard to think about what's the real answer to this question. We're going to dip it twice, we're going to double dip, because we want to get out of Mitzrayim for good. We want to really have a sense of closeness, feeling of achdos, Buddha stays up to the extent that we feel connected to one another and a greater experience of Am Yisrael, Hashem should, God willing, bring us out of the Mitzvah, out of our constrictedness, so that we should be Shalom Aleichem, should bring us to that place of true freedom, the Mikdash, with the big place of the Firah in our days.
They just leave off with a quick thought. We know the really only mitzvah from the Torah, food-wise, Pesach, is eating matzah. There's addition soon that we've been talking about, of course, Pesach, and my word with it. But from a level nowadays, it's just a matzah. And of course, we have mitzvahs, as well as not doing melacha. So, why do we eat matzah on Pesach? Right, we already mentioned, the claim mentioned the Hagadah. The Hagadah says, Hashum ma, Hashum shelo yispik b'tzekam shel avotenu le'achmitz. Because our forefathers, though, did not have time to become chametz. Right, shenigla aleihem melech v'chamotim et Hashem took them out, right, and it brings from the pasuk, in Shemot, Yudbet, Yamtet, ויופו את הבצק אשר הוציאו ממצרים ומות מצות כי לא החמץ, כי גורשו ממצרים לא יכלו להתמהמה. The Mitzri didn't let the Jewish people to bake their, or to let their bread rise, their dough rise, and therefore they had to consequently eat matzah. So from the Bala Hagadah, whoever, again, as I did is mentioned, whoever wrote this Hagadah, well, this is, we know it's already from the, this is mentioned in the Gemara in Pesachim. This part. So they are saying that the entire purpose of matzah, and again, consequently, the reason why we don't eat chametz throughout Pesach is only because the Egyptians didn't let us eat or let our dough rise. So the famous question that's asked by already many, and the Ramban alludes to this, is that, wait a second, if you go back, we mentioned that this pasuk that Hagadah brings is pasuk Lamed 39. But if you go back to 15, 18, 20, the Torah already commanded in Israel to have matzah. We had to eat matzah already. We have to eat the Korban Pesach with matzah. Right? So wait a second. Before it even happened, that the Mitzri didn't let us go out, or didn't let our dough rise, the Torah already told, well, Hashem commanded us that you have to eat matzah. Right? It's such a powerful question. Powerful question. And when you read the Hagadah, it sounds like it just doesn't fit with what the Torah is saying. So Rashi, and many of the Rishonim, they learn of this, is that they say that from the Torah, here's Rashi, I'll read you Rashi, it says, Amitzim lo hilechu lishmot kedei chimutz. So the Mitzrim are the ones that didn't let us make our dough to chametz, which is implying that if we could have, we would have had the time to make chametz. We would have made nice sourdough bread, right? So how do you answer this? So the Sifnei Chachamim explains there is no isur chametz because Pesach and Mitzrayim, they were not commanded to be careful with chametz. Only later, for the generations, they had to be careful with chametz. So fascinating, this Rashi is telling us is that, and this is based off Gemara, so like this, is that from Mitzrayim, Bnei Yisrael there, they could have actually, they just had to eat matzah on the night when they're eating the Korban Pesach. But there was no isur of Bal Yireh, Bal Yimatzeh, they could actually have chametz. They could have chametz. Very fascinating, meaning they can have chametz in their house, but they can't eat it. They have to eat matzah on the first night. This is according to Rashi. But the question on this, the very stark question of this, is first of all, again, Rashi is going like the Bala Hagadah. Sukkim before that, it doesn't say, if you just read the simple Torah, already before it tells us that for all these days you cannot have chametz, right? You cannot have chametz. It's already telling us before, so now you have to kind of as they say, touch it up and fix it and say, oh no, that commandments were, that's only for later, but it wasn't going for that, when Yetziat Mitzrayim at that moment. And the biggest question, I think, is that when they are forbidden to eat on that night, on that day, the first day of Pesach, they're not allowed to eat chametz. Why would they be busy making chametz? Right? According to Rashi, the way you're learning the Torah is that they weren't able to, they didn't have time to make chametz, but they really wanted to make chametz, but they couldn't eat the chametz, so they were making it for the next day. That's how I have to learn Rashi. They were making the chametz for the next day. First of all, also anybody who bakes, who wants to have bread from the day before? You want to have fresh sourdough bread. When I go to the KC market, I always check the gas times. Is this today or from yesterday? You want to see the steam in the back, right? If it's not steamy, you don't stay away, right? So it's a very, very difficult question. So the Ramban, he actually has a different shot, and it sounds like it's arguing on the Hagadah, completely arguing on the Hagadah. It says like this. I'll read it to you. They were making matzah regardless because of the mitzvah that they were commanded to do. They had to make matzah. Because it says, it said before, right? So then what does the pasuk say? They had to basically go out of Mitzrayim, they were pushed out fast. No, they were baking matzah, but they were going to bake the matzah in Mitzrayim, but not because they were forced out, they had to bake it on the way. Right? They couldn't bake it in the city, in wherever they were in Mitzrayim. They couldn't take it carrying already baked matzot. So they had to carry the dough raw. They had to carry it in the bowls that they would make the dough in, and they would carry it on their shoulders. And then before it became chametz, when they're carrying it, it turned into they baked it when they went to Sukkot or somewhere on the path. So very fascinating. There's also the Yonatan, he said that the sun was so hot that they baked it on. Or they were carrying it on the back, not baking the matzah in that fashion, which is an essay itself. That they didn't get burnt, but the matzah got burnt. So you see from here, from the Ramban. So you see from this Ramban that he's arguing about Hagadah. He's arguing Rashi. He's arguing about Hagadah because the Hagadah again says the reason why we eat matzah is because they didn't have time for their dough to rise, which implies that if they had time, they would have made regular chametz. So you see from this that we have to find a deeper reason behind the mitzvah of matzah. First of all, actually, before I get into this, it's fascinating. I was looking into the Gemara because the Gemara has a different nusach of our Hagadah. If you go to the nusach of the Hagadah of the Gemara, it says matzah al-shum. This is actually matzah al-shum because shenigalu avoteim mitzrayim. Right, our Girsa, in the Girsa, if you go to the Rosh, he brings it down. There's matzah al-shum, he brings like our Hagadah. But the Girsa of the Rif is completely different. And I saw a few of the Onim as well, they have the Girsa. So it's funny that the Vilna Gemara has the Girsa not like we have in our Hagadah. And that it kind of explains, I think the Ramban as well, will say that he had a different Girsa. He had the Girsa also like this, and that's why he didn't have a siyah behind what he's saying and with what the Hagadah is saying, because the Hagadah is very satum. It says, we're eating matzah because we were redeemed from Mitzrayim. Doesn't mean because we didn't have time to bake it. It doesn't go into those details. It's very stuck. It's very closed off. So just a thought about matzah. The truth is, we do find matzah in the Torah way before. Where do we find it in the Torah before? By Abraham, by Lot, right? He was making matzah. So matzah is not something special just for Pesach. Matzah, you actually find it even in Israel with Bedouins. They're actually making matzah still today. Meaning it's not no offense, Ashkenazi matzah, it's lafa matzah, it's hard matzah, right? It's a soft. Yeah. So it's actually it's soft matzah. And truth is, you can even go to other cultures around the world, and they're making these different nomadic people that don't live in cities, they don't live in modern urban areas, they bake this type of bread. They don't have time to let their dough rise. They don't have time. Who else does it? For example, the Mexicans, they have tortillas. Tortilla, do you have to let it rise? You do not. My friend actually, he has a base matzah in California, and he has a few gerim that are Mexican, and he lets them do the entire matzah making because this is the experts in making tortillas. And the tortilla, Sephardic matzah, is really like a tortilla. Probably you don't have to let it rise, nothing. That's what they use. So you see that this concept of matzah was found across the globe by nomadic people. And who was the opposite in Mitzrayim? What did Paro love? He had wine, Sarah Mashkim, he also had a Sarah Hafim, a baker, right? He was all about an expert baker. He was very particular about his sourdough breads. Very, very particular about these type of breads. So much so I saw even historically, they found the recipe book for Ramses III, and he has an entire list of like 50 different types of breads that they would make. They're very into breads. You even have in that list of Mitzrayim, you actually find there's bread all over the place. You can Google it, there's bread everywhere. So this concept of bread was very connected to the Egyptian culture because it means, comfort. It means you have time. It means you're a more materialistic type of life. And here, when we're eating the matzah, we're commanded to eat matzah. Hashem is telling us, now you're getting ready to go and you guys are leaving. This is the true essence of God, of leaving, then being exiled from the place you were and going on your trip to Israel. You are nomadic people. And to remember it, this is why we have a commandment. It makes it a little more powerful, this Hagadah, is we have to eat matzah and only matzah and stay away from this chametz because this is the mode, the mindset we have to have. We are people now, nomadic people, leaving this. And when you, like we said, throughout the entire Hagadah, it's about being interactive. It's about, you have to see yourself as if you're leaving. Through the matzah itself, you can remember this. Not only because it was asked, but we are a people now, living as a nomadic people in order to get to our destination. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Hagadah Night.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you so much. Very much. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. What was that?
Come now, come on. What?